I'm going to start making this a little bit more realistic by shading in my layers where I've got shadows marked out, midtones in their own layers, and highlights in their own layers. And as you can see, what I've done here is I've zoomed in really close, and I'm going to keep zoomed in as I'm working on all of those shadows, midtones, and highlights. So one thing that I did in my flats layer is I actually brought my opacity down in the flats layer to about 50%, roughly speaking, because I wanted to be able to see some of that original photograph underneath to help me do my shading in. Some artists will also call this rendering. Basically, we're making things look a little bit more realistic by changing values and making things look more three-dimensional. So I always start with my brush tool, and I'm going to use a soft brush. Again, the brush choices, you have a lot of different things to choose from. I would probably choose a brush that has a softer edge to it. You could just go with a soft round, or you could try some of these media brushes for a little bit more texture as you begin to work. I've also heard some artists call this the texture layers. But again, sometimes you might hear it referred to as rendering. And, we used to just call it old fashioned shading, which is obviously something you guys would do with pencils or any other medium like paint. So I think I'm just going to go with a soft round brush, and I would consider changing the flow of your brush and the opacity of your brush as you go, because remember, as you brush, you're going to build up that brush work. It's going to layer on top as you continue to brush over areas. So instead of 100%, I'm probably going to brush maybe at like 70 to start, but you can play around with your opacities and you can play around with your flows as you go. So I'm going to start laying in my shadows here, and I've got to start thinking about what colors I want to be using. I've gone with a more realistic skin tone here, but you guys may decide that you want to do something really unusual like a monochromatic green skin tone. I'm just going to do something really straightforward. And I can kind of match the colors to the colors that are in the original photo if I wish to do that. And one way I could do that is by clicking in the area that I want to borrow the color from. And as soon as I hover outside the color picker, I get my dropper. And so my dropper is trying to match some of these colors that are underneath that I already have here. Again, you can change your hue if you decide you really want to make unusual colors. Go ahead and do that. But I'm just going to use something a little bit more straightforward for my skin. So my shadows are going to be my darker colors, and I'm using a brush that is a low opacity, and I'm going to build up texture and brushwork as I go. Don't forget, the size of your brush is critical, so your right bracket is going to make your brush bigger and your left bracket will make your brush smaller. So I know I have some shadow areas in here, and I'm just slowly going to build up, and I'm following my photograph underneath to help with that. And again, I might need to keep going back to my color picker and changing my shadow colors as I go here. So I know this corner is going to be a little bit darker, so I'm going to build up a little bit more shadow in here as I go. And maybe I'll do some shadows in the crease areas as I work. I'm going to drag my navigator around, and I'm thinking about where all those shadows are going to be laid out in my drawing. So there's definitely going to be a lot of shadows underneath his chin area. Remember, as you're doing your brush work, it's really critical for you to look at the layers that you're working in. So I'm working in my shadows layers. That's the only place I want my shadows to go. I'm going to start bumping up to other things. Maybe I'll try some highlights in the nose, but just make sure that when you're brushing your light colors, you're really in that highlight layer so they all stay within their own category here. Then I'm going to choose a lighter color and work with that sort of bump in the nose and under the eyes to brighten up some highlights and give this face a little bit of dimension. Again, change your brush size for the area that you're working on as you go. So I usually like to just work on each section one at a time, highlights, midtones, and shadows. And that's the basic idea with